Because then I can see them. All right, I think we're here. Are we here?
And then another meeting. We're here. After we read them all.
John Anderson is going to sit down. Those of you who may be in the audience and want to have other conversations, I would ask that you hold them outside. If the folks here in the room could really be mostly listening, really exclusively listening, I'd appreciate that. So you folks in the audience, if you do need to talk, excuse me, over on my right here, if you need to be speaking, if you could do it outside, that would be great. Thank you very much. All right. Those of you in the audience may not have gotten to watch the video, as Jane Dolan did, so let me just explain what the CAC members know, how we're going to work this evening. We have 11 study areas to look at. My math says if we do them in 15 minutes each, it'll take us a little less than 3 hours. Wouldn't that be great? I have a rich fantasy life, it's true. So I'm going to try and move us along at 15 or 20-minute increments. The way that we've worked in the past that's worked pretty well has been that Tanya will give a presentation about the area. Then we will open it up first for any clarifying questions you may have. I know some of you in a few cases would like to ask speakers from the public and some of the cities to come forward and discuss issues and answer questions. We can do that, and then I'll facilitate a discussion to try and move towards a couple of proposals to consider, and ultimately a straw vote to see which of those proposals we want to work with. As committee members know, we are beginning by looking at 3 alternatives. But there's no requirement that we choose, certainly not choose a single alternative all the way through this evening, and we don't even have to choose a single alternative for any given study area. You can also mix and match components within alternatives, and in some cases people have already presented a 4th alternative, and it's also possible for any of you to suggest a 4th alternative. So any of that's a possibility, just like it was in the last 2 meetings. Unless there are questions or comments about what we're doing, I'm going to turn it over to Tanya for study area 2, where we're going to start. Sue, did you have something first?
I would like to make one comment, and that is I've read all this stuff for tonight, and I've listened to all the people, and how we can be even debating whether we should have a water element, I don't understand, because every single person that has spoken, everybody that's written stuff, they say water in there, and I think that we have got to do it, and I just wanted to say that because every issue comes back down to that. And how we could even think of not having a water element just blows my mind. Thank you.
Thank you. And I know all committee members know this, there will be a meeting, I believe, on June 5th to talk about a water element and any other elements that people want to consider adding. Any other comments before we start?
I have a question for Tanya.
Oh, so I'm sorry. You know,
sorry.
Todd?
Somebody's ahead of me. Go ahead. Go ahead. Okay. Tanya, some of the material that we just got today regarding the City of Chico and their views and the City of Chico staff and their views, are you going to include some of those in your pre-announcements on each section? Or, David, are we going to kind of look at those, refer back to those after Tanya finishes speaking as when open debate begins?
I did prepare some comments regarding the memo that we prepared that's in your packet today. I haven't actually had the opportunity to look at the new memo from the city itself that was just submitted. So we'll have part of their comments.
Thank you.
Could I ask a question also?
Well, could I take Toby first just because he deferred to Todd, and then we'll come back to you, Sue.
I guess just generally on those comments that were provided to us, I mean, it seems to me if that was the City of Chico's direction to staff to put the memo together and they had thought through the recommendations that then they provide into this process, it would seem appropriate to then consider that as we move through. But I guess from my perspective, this is just a staff memo. And we just got this information, and it does have the potential to sway people's opinions. So I would argue that it's... I don't know what to think of this stuff because I think there are inconsistencies. We got it at the last minute, and I mean, I just don't know what to really think about.
You know, Toby, I agree with you. I'm actually referring to the other packet, which actually some of that goes back a year, and I think it would have been more appropriate had we gotten this before tonight. And those were where they had specific recommendations. In a year, I would think that that had some city council involvement, whereas the one we just got tonight is questionable as to whether the council itself has even reviewed any of the content. So I'm with you on that one, Toby. I don't know about the other.
It seems that we have taken the same type of information previous to the meeting and been willing to make the same exact straw votes or recommendations in regards to other information given right before the meeting. So I don't understand why, in this particular case, this is a problem.
And my question is kind of the same, and that is, now, May 1st, is it that we're going to review some of the more difficult ones we've gone over? And am I correct of what May 1st is?
On May 1st, any of you who want to, we have agreed to this at our last meeting, any of you who want to will be able to suggest any individual study area that you think needs to be reconsidered, and we will require 10 votes to reopen the question.
Okay.
So if 10 of you agree that you want to reopen it, we can. It's my sincere hope that we won't get 10 votes on 31 study areas.
Well, no, but I think tonight, I think I'm agreeing with the two of them. Tonight, we've got a couple of areas that are kind of iffy in our minds from the information that we received, and I wonder if it would be appropriate when we get to them tonight, if I'm true and right and you're right, that we could postpone them until May 1 and postpone a decision until May 1.
Well, so you all are the committee. And
so we could, really absorb some of this stuff. If you elect
to postpone a decision, obviously we will do that. That will make it impossible for us to show you a combined preferred alternative at your May 1st meeting. I know some of you want to know, at least on a preliminary basis, what is it as a whole that you will have considered. So you can certainly defer some study areas if you like. Another approach would be to make a preliminary decision, look at that, and then if there are 10 votes to reopen it, you can always reopen it.
I would suggest that.
Yes. Yeah. I agree with that. I just wanted to make sure in my own mind I knew what May 1st was.
Yeah, May 1st is an opportunity for any 10 of you who want to reopen any particular study area to do so.
Thank you.
David,
John.
I think... Oh, go ahead.
John and then Bruce.
Before we launch into the specific study areas, I think that the issue of who's counting what and basically whose planning turf are we on needs to be kind of vetted out, because I think that's kind of hanging in the air, and specifically with the city of Chico. And I think Jason's a swell guy, but I think you're a little bit off base where if we get something, get a one-page letter from the city that said, hey, here's some errata, or we get something that's got a quarter-inch on it, City of Chico steel on it, and it looks really serious and it looks like it's really weighty, but it's just a staff memo. So I think that, let's take that in, but let's get back to the point of if we're talking about an area like Bellemere with 3,000 units that's also being looked at as part of the Chico plan, are we going to end up double counting stuff? What are we doing?
Well, let me try to explain what we've done, and I want to make sure Steve and the City of Chico representatives know that as well. We have, in 3 of our 34 study areas, actually designated study areas that are within the city limits of 3 of the 5 cities or towns in the county. And the reason we've done that is that there are 3 of those jurisdictions that do report that they have additional build-out capacity within their existing city limits. Chico is one of those. In all 3 alternatives, those 3 study areas have the same number of units in every case because they're already inside the city limits, already designated for growth. It is certainly possible that any of those cities in their current general plan processes might change that number, but we've taken a number that was the best available guess at the time that we put these alternatives together about 4 or 5 months ago and started with that number. So that number's within the overall alternatives. You can see it at the bottom of our charts, and that's counted. Then everything that's within our other study areas is outside the city limits, and we aren't particularly trying to count under whose auspices it will be built. Obviously, that is an issue, both in terms of the jurisdiction that will ultimately permit it, finding out the nature of the permitting that's going to occur, and ultimately who gets to count it towards their housing element allocations. Those are issues, but we haven't really tried to address those. We've just looked at them as numbers. We've counted them once and once only. And we've counted them within these study areas because right now they are under county jurisdiction. We haven't tried to predict whether they will be developed under county or city auspices. That would be worked out later. Certainly it will be one of the policy questions that you all have already raised as to whether the county's general plan will have any policies in it that suggest that most urbanization or all urbanization should occur under city auspices instead of the county, at least in some areas. That'll be something we look at in meeting series 5. For now, the counting is, as far as I'm concerned, we're counting once, and we're counting without regard to whether it ultimately happens under city or county jurisdiction, but we're counting those units first in those 3 study areas that are in the city limits, and otherwise we're counting them as study areas that are currently in the county and without regard for whether they might be annexed into a city in the future or not.
Okay, but folks sit around a table at BCAG or in Sacramento or whatever and say Butte County is this allocation for growth, and that goes to the nice folks at BCAG, and they say so much in the unincorporated areas of the county, which is what we've been looking at, and so much in the incorporated municipalities. Is there any expectation, because it would seem kind of regular, that those incorporated municipalities would take that allocation and build it within areas that they annex, or does it assume that they're only doing it inside their existing boundaries?
BCAG has, as I think all of you know, made a set of projections for growth through 2030 or 2035. 2030, and has shown, as you've said, allocations, so to speak, for each of the 5 jurisdictions and the unincorporated county. I have asked, when you say city on this line, do you mean the existing city limits or future annexations? How do you count the annexation of an existing unit? And I don't know if there's a representative from BCAG that wants to try and answer the question also, but my understanding of the answer has been we're not exactly sure, these are approximations. And particularly because of that answer, it seems safest to me to just not try and split hairs on those lines on BCAG's table. I think the overall county growth projection that BCAG has made is a relatively solid number of what BCAG did project. Exactly what the numbers for the individual cities and unincorporated county area are, I think are something that would need to be resolved further, because I don't think anybody completely understands at what time development will occur relative to potential annexation.
Okay, but to the point that BCAG is the group that is the first stop on the hit parade of your housing element finding its way down to Sacramento, they're making the rough cut saying you guys do about this much, you guys do about that much. And also, since they're the guys who actually hand out the transportation money, which has something to do with urbanization and transportation needs, the fact that they're making a rough allocation about where folks are going to be hanging their hat at night, you know, where that line gets drawn is pretty important.
The line is definitely important, and John, as you've said, and I want to watch time, but you've said before I have a rich fantasy life, and part of that rich fantasy life of mine is that I think one could make decisions about where appropriate areas are for growth without first asking, will it be under city or county jurisdiction? There's no doubt that ultimately there will need to be policy discussions between the cities or the jurisdictions and the county to figure out under whose auspices it will occur. And there will need to be discussions with BCAG to make sure that it's properly accounted for when we look at housing element law. Okay. I'm encouraging, and the process I think to date has been pretty successful at saying we're going to look at this generically in terms of is this an appropriate area for growth or not, without first asking is it going to be under city or county jurisdiction. We've done that at 2 meetings, and I at least am hoping that we can get through a 3rd meeting on that same basis.
Okay, I have one last point,
okay, one
and then
last.
I would yield balance of my time to the gentleman from Berkeley. In a situation where there is land adjacent to an existing city, either city limit or sphere line, as we did in Paradise and Gridley and the like, for us to say in an area unincorporated, to identify it as we think it'll be growing, but we think it ought to happen under the city of Gridley's auspices. That's an appropriate determination for us to make, right?
I think that's perfectly fine, yeah. And that's really a statement that says under essentially no circumstance, from your perspective, under no circumstance will the county approve development at a higher density in that area. It would be up to the city to decide it.
Okay.
Okay, any other questions before we go? Bruce, I'm sorry, yes.
Pass.
You're going to pass. Anybody else? Okay,
I have one more, and I've brought this point up before. If we do not approve an area that is designated for growth by the county, and the city decides to do that, what are they up against when it comes to LAFCO?
What are the whats when it comes?
What is the city up against when it comes to approval of LAFCO if it's inconsistent with the county's general plan?
I think that there could be issues if the statements you're making now and will make in meeting series 5 are interpreted correctly or incorrectly to mean you've decided this area should not be developed. So we are going to need to clarify. I don't want to try and do it necessarily tonight, but either May 1st or in subsequent meetings, we will need to clarify in areas like Oro Bay or Rio de Oro, to name two you've already looked at. You voted on both of those in Oroville that you did not want to see them develop under county auspices. We probably do need to clarify whether that's a policy statement on the county's part that they should not be developed, or is it a neutral statement that says the county doesn't really have an opinion and it would be up to the city to decide. Those are two pretty different points of view. I think LAFCO would look at them differently. I don't want to try and reopen those tonight, and I don't necessarily think you'll decide that about any of these study areas tonight, but we probably will need to relook at those at some point to make sure that there is clear county policy.
I think we will have that need to know based on the city's memorandum in their areas.
Yeah. And if you can get there tonight, that's great. If I think the first thing for you tonight is what you've already done in the other study areas, which is just to make a preliminary determination as to what you want the county's land use designation in the area to be. Toby, you got a last point before
I got a last. I just have a question about some numbers. The BCAG estimates in this planning period, 2006 to 2030, suggest that in the city of Chico, there'll be an additional roughly 20,000 new dwelling units. In our packet that you provided us, you spoke to city staff and others and are suggesting that there's only 10,000 that are going to happen in this planning period.
In the existing city limits of the
existing city limits, okay.
So those are projects like Marion Park and Northwest Chico and things that are already incorporated in the city.
And I would further argue that that number is wrong based on if you brought the list up to date.
What number is wrong? I'm sorry.
The 10,000 units that we have capacity for. There are projects on that list that the city provided that are either complete or near complete. There's also a practical level that some of those vacant lands will never be developed. So I think there's a practical approach to that number
so you actually think the number's lower?
I think the capacity, I'm sorry.
You think 10,000 is too high? And let
me clarify exactly. I think that number that the city provided that we have available is low. So we, in my opinion, we need to designate up here so that we can accommodate that growth. I think the city is saying that there's this number, but it's actually this number. We don't have enough.
So and I want to be clear because I don't want anybody to think I've put words in Steve's or anybody else's mouth. The number that 10,000 is a number that we calculated. We did get city input on it. We did the best we could to digest what we were hearing from the city, but I need to take responsibility for that number, the number we did for Orville. And
that 10,000 number has been put in tons of reports.
Right. But I think, Jason, what you're saying, and I just want to be clear on the terminology, you're saying that you think 10,000 is an overestimate of what can be accommodated inside Chico's current limits. And for that reason, you are actually hoping that more would be accommodated in areas outside the limits in order to make up that deficit.
With hopes of future annexation.
Yeah.
Yes. And let me confuse it a little more. There's some earlier numbers just before the housing crunch or drop that used the number 5,000, and that would be over sufficient for the next 9 years in the city limits.
Well, these are now. I want to be clear on two different things here. I don't know that number, but I think, Todd, the way you just described that number was a projection of how many units Chico might actually build in a certain period of time, whereas the number we're trying to predict is build out of the area within the current city limits, regardless of the time frame under which it would occur. Those would be two different numbers.
If we come to the point where we need clarification, Brendan Vig is here, who did the report. So.
Well, my real question is that's the starting point for any discussion about any of these other study areas is actually how much growth can we expect to occur in the city of Chico over this planning period.
Inside the current city limits.
Well, I don't know. Is that what Is that what the BCAG projects, or does that include annexations?
The BCAG projection, I'm sorry we're taking so much time. I really want to try and move on.
Well, you shouldn't be sorry. There's no reason to be sorry. We're all confused.
Right. The BCAG projection that you just quoted from, if I know what piece of paper you're looking at, is the number that I referred to. Well, that's a different format than
it's
the piece
just the final projections on their website.
And it's about 44,000 new units countywide?
Yes.
Okay. So that number that does include, I think it says 20 for Chico, is a number that probably, according to BCAG staff, is both within the existing city limits and some future annexations. Is it what areas being annexed? They don't particularly say they know.
Sure.
Does it include units that might be annexed that are already built? Maybe, maybe not. Do you then deduct those from the county ledger because they've, the county then has lost units? That wasn't really exactly worked out. Those were meant to be round numbers. The 44,000 net increase for the county, I think, is a pretty solid number as the BCAG projection. I think any of those individual lines for any of the 5 jurisdictions or the county are probably more numbers that you should take advisedly, because I don't think they were exactly worked out in terms of how it relates to annexation or annexation of either new development areas or annexation of existing units.
Okay, then let me just close by saying BCAG is the regional transportation agency. They apply for millions and millions of dollars. They're at the, like as John mentioned, they're at the front line. I mean, if they're as sophisticated as we have in terms of growth projections in this community. They just are. And they're held responsible because they apply for millions and millions of dollars worth of transportation funds. And so when they put 20,000 there, they're planning out over the time period and then making decisions about what to go after in terms of federal and state dollars based on those projections. And so I'm really trying to get to what should we assume is the baseline that's going to occur. And you're saying 10,000, and that's fine. I just want to understand. And BCAG is saying 20,000.
Well, and those two numbers are consistent or can be consistent with each other. Our number of 10,000 is within the existing, do we have a map here? Within study area 1. Is that its number? Yeah. Study area 1. Study area 1 is the existing city limits of Chico. BCAG is saying that with additional annexations of either existing units or undeveloped land that gets developed, there can be another 10,000 units added to Chico. And BCAG has not said where those units will be or whether they will be existing units that get annexed now that they've already been built, or whether they are new units that we will be built after the land is annexed. But roughly speaking, about 10,000 of those would be built inside Study Area 1, which is the city of Chico. The other 10,000 out of that 20 that BCAG's quoting would be built somewhere else, perhaps in our study areas 2, 3, 6, 9, etc., and perhaps in areas that we elected not to study but which the city is going to study and ultimately annex. That would be how those numbers match each other. Hopefully that clarified something. Are we ready to go? No?
No. I'm ready to go. Call the question. Let's go.
John, you okay or no?
He's going to be all right. He'll talk again. He'll speak again.
Because keeping everyone from a chance on diving into Belmure, I know everyone's going to hate me. So we've got this, the number from BCAG, 44,000 countywide. We've got a rough number about, in the unincorporated areas, about 11,500. That's kind of...
That's a number on that BCAG chart. And I'm saying to take that number a little bit more with a grain of salt, but it is on the BCAG chart.
So let's say, throw another 50% on it, it's 16,000. Okay. We've, just in Paradise, Gridley, Biggs, Orville, Bangor, we've, said grace over another, 40,000 units?
Yes, but many of those units, just like you're talking about in Chico, would actually be within areas that could be annexed by the cities of Oroville, Paradise, Gridley, or Biggs. So in that sense, you can't count many of those 35,000 units, to use your number, towards that 11,000 number that's assigned by BCAG to the county. You would properly count them towards the BCAG numbers for Oroville, Gridley, Biggs, or Paradise, because they are in areas adjacent to those cities that are also candidates for incorporation.
Okay, it would have been great if someone had put together a map and said, here's where the numbers you guys are looking at go, and here's where the numbers that other people are looking at go.
And what I'm trying to say to you, and again, I don't know if there's a BCAG rep who wants to talk further on this, but we've asked BCAG, well, I didn't say could you draw a map, but I've said can you tell me pretty specifically, how did you get these numbers? How do they relate to current or future city boundaries? And they've said, we didn't figure that out exactly, their approximations.
So basically, we've addressed the entire, Council of Governments notion of how much growth needs to happen already, before we even got to Chico. How did we do that?
I can't quote you on this 35,000 number. I don't know if we have a...
Well, do
we know how many units we've approved? We don't know? We haven't summed them yet. I don't know if the number's 35,000. It is true that any of our three alternatives had more than the 44,000 units in them. There has been a lot of talk that the 44,000 number was put together by BCAG before a lot of growth pressure started here coming up 99 and 70 corridors. That growth pressure has obviously fallen off a lot with the housing crisis over the last year. But there was a time a year ago when many people were saying the 44,000 number for the county as a whole might have been somewhat low.
If we were to only designate the exact amount of land for the exact amount of projected growth, the last person would get the last house. The affordability would be ridiculous. So I think it's our duty to make sure there's a certain percentage over. So to say that we've already done it, I think is not the marketing way we should do it, or the economic value to it.
And this is
100% more than 11 that we're supposed to.
This is.
Do you want them all to move to Paradise?
Well, but John, I don't think you have 400% of what you're supposed to. I think because, again, the 44,000 numbers for the county as a whole, and your argument is you're at about 35,000 now for the county as a whole, not having done Chico. If you added, I'm going to just use BCAG's number, 20,000 more in the greater Chico area, you'll be at 55 as compared to 44.
Well, let's look at the math on May 1st, and I'll reserve...
Yeah, and I think that's exactly why you've agreed to come back on May 1st, is because then we can show you the total number. You can compare that to the BCAG total, and we're actually going to try and disaggregate it into a sort of a projection of these 5 geographies used by BCAG, looking at the 5 municipalities, the 6 geographies used by BCAG, 5 municipalities in the unincorporated county. We'll show you subtotals, we'll show you what they add up to, and then you can look on May 1st as to whether you think any adjustments need to be made.
I just need to clarify in my own mind. The numbers we are coming up with in this process are not the written in stone numbers. We still have to vet policy. Once we have the policy, then we will go back and look at the land uses. The policy will give us the vision. We can go back and look at the alternatives that we've selected to vet those even further to come up with the general plan that's going to be the vision of the county as a whole. So numbers that we're coming up with now, whether we come up with 150 or 40,000, really don't matter.
I think that's an excellent way of looking at it. That could help us to move forward.
I told somebody who owned a study area that 2,000 units sounds good to me. I think you're creating the expectation that something's going to happen.
I think that what I sense is that we're trying to make a general plan, a specific plan for various areas. And I think what we need to stay focused on is that this is a general plan. We still don't even know what our damn policies are. We don't have the vision that we have been trying to draw over a year and a half. For whatever reason, the county has said we want to go through this process. We want to have you develop the alternatives for the various land uses in hopes that maybe that will suggest policy. I think there are many of us who are skeptical of that and will want to see what the policies are. But I think that the finished product will provide a reasonable number of housing units in reasonable areas susceptible of growth, or we have not done our job.
Well, I'm sorry. Words are your trade as an attorney, and I think you have a lot of faith in words and policies. When we start talking about numbers that tie to real estate, people pay attention and they remember. So we've been talking about numbers tied to real estate for these last 3 meetings, and that stuff counts up and it tallies up.
And I would think David would be the first one to tell anybody who's vesting their private fortune in numbers that have come out of the last 2 meetings and tonight's meeting, they're perhaps acting a bit prematurely.
Yeah, and also...
Which would never happen on the part of developers, right?
Okay, I want to make a plea that we move forward.
Yeah, these are good policy issues I think we need to resolve before we move on.
Well, and you got to remember, John, that just because it's a study area doesn't mean it's an entitlement area. Or, I mean, an expectation. It's just an area being looked at. Doesn't mean that they're going to get to do what the study area says.
And my thought is, even if it goes all the way through and ends up at the far end of the general plan, as we saw in Oroville, we overshot lots of those numbers. And we have lots of examples coming up, Forest Ranch and things, that go back to the last general plan, that none of those were built out because the market wasn't there. I mean, we're looking at Forest Ranch, it's the same bloody numbers, we might approve the same ones, it's going to go on another 30 years. Sure. These are the upper bookends. I don't see the development happening in probably 50% of what we approved last week. Correct. I think it's just the nature of the game.
Right. One of the questions I wanted to ask when I first got here was, why did you never put John Anderson and me together? And now I think I know, so I withdraw that question.
That's Jason's day to watch this.
All right, are we ready to move?
Yes. Let's move on.
Study Area 2. All right. Tanya.
Okay, so we're going to begin with Alternative 1, which is the existing North Chico specific plan. The majority of the study area, the large yellow area, is very low density residential. There's also some, press the wrong button. There's some retail and industrial and public uses along Highway 99. You can see in here, and that's within the Chico sphere of influence. And then the remainder of the study area is called the village core, and that includes very low, medium and high density residential, as well as some retail, industrial, and public. And this alternative allows about 3,800 new homes. Under Alternative 2, the village core area is modified basically to increase the residential densities and the amount of retail. This would allow approximately 6,000 new homes. And in Alternative 3, the village core again is modified with a significant increase in the amount of retail and industrial. And the overall residential densities are decreased so that it's all basically medium density residential. This would allow approximately 1,600 new homes. So the city input here that I'm summarizing in this presentation, as I mentioned before, is based on the memo that we provided in the supplemental packet today that you received. The city has concerns in the North Chico specific plan area. The city has concerns about sewer circulation and meadow foam habitat and flooding. They've questioned whether the amount of residential could support the commercial uses in this area. The city's also mentioned that they're looking to find additional areas for industrial development in and around the city, and they do think that this area could be appropriate as it is near the airport. And finally, the city has indicated that they feel that development in the village core is viable, and mentioning in particular that flooding is less of an issue in that part of the study area. And our open house input that we received about the North Chico specific plan study area included 3 comments. There were some concerns about wastewater and water issues in the area, as well as a suggestion to locate all the development along the highway, and then another suggestion to reduce the overall size of this study area. And we'll open it up for discussion.
So
Toby, there was
to
some
summarize, the alternatives all leave the area that we call yellow, but is sort of the greenish chartreuse area, and the area along Highway 99 essentially the same, and they differ really only in the village core area, which maybe you've got the pointer there, in the village core, and they really differ in terms of the residential density and the mix of industrial in that area. Okay.
David, please.
Yes, please.
I have a question and then I have a comment. The question, if my colleagues will bear with me, I'm on page 105 of our more substantial document. It's number 2, groundwater recharge potential. Alternatives 1, 2, and 3 call for significant growth in the study area and therefore receive a D. My question is for Barbara Blamas, and I wanted to get the issue of groundwater in early, because there is a suit that has been filed by Butte Environmental Council related to the pumping of groundwater. And many of the study areas that we're going to consider tonight all are dependent on pumping groundwater. We've had several presentations on water, and I don't mean from the citizens. We also spent some time on the geology of this area. So I'd like to get, if I may, I would like to ask Barbara Vlamas to comment on who's pumping the water from the Tuscan Aquifer and whether or not it's reasonable to assume that water is going to be available for the developments that have been proposed this evening.
Is Barbara here still? I'm afraid Barbara has left
the building.
We're going to look for her, but maybe we can take a did you have a comment as well, Scott?
My comment, really, I'm going to try to keep this brief because don't shake your head, Jason. We're covering a lot of stuff tonight. This is a recharge area, and the water in Butte County in the Tuscan Aquifer comes from the rainfall. So as we dealt with the geology, this is a sensitive area in terms of recharge. And if it receives a D, I think the only alternative we can really consider this evening is number 1.
And if I just want to be very clear, and I felt like I maybe didn't do this as well as I should have at the second meeting, the 3 alternatives in the large extent of the area, the chartreuse color, are all really identical. They receive a D on groundwater recharge primarily for that purpose. It's my personal opinion from a technical perspective, I don't think the recharge potential is going to be vastly different in 1, 2, or 3. Certainly the number of units is, and maybe that's your basis for supporting.
To follow that question up just a little bit, David, since with the cart in front of the horse bit, with policies and zoning in our future meetings in Series 5, do we have the ability to come back and say that for example, certain zoning areas in this have to leave X% open to recharge?
Absolutely, yes.
Also, what's the deal with the non-compliance with the airport land use compatibility? None of them comply with it totally.
Tanya, can you talk to that?
The very low density residential designation, that large yellow area, is not in compliance with the airport land use compatibility zones. And so that's why all 3 are not compatible.
I just have a question.
And just to be clear, whereas the parts that differ in the village core and the 3 alternatives, in all 3 alternatives, they are essentially compliant. Is that right?
Essentially, I think in alternative 1, I think there's that small area of very low density residential inside the village core, and that is also non-compliant. But I think the rest, if I remember correctly, are actually compliant.
So again, in the village core area, it's just this, what shows as chartreuse here, that is non-compliant. But some of this area is non-compliant, and it's the same in all 3 alternatives, and it's the same in all 3 alternatives because that area, to a certain degree, is already spoken for. Much of it is already developed, at least in a piecemeal fashion, and we didn't feel that it was changeable under any of the alternatives.
So is it possible to develop an alternative that's compatible with the land use plan for the airport?
Yeah. It would require us to actually designate land for higher densities of development, ironically enough, than are there. The airport land use plan allows higher densities to be compatible than sort of medium densities, and we would have to redesignate areas around the airport runway, which are already pretty much spoken for with the pattern of development that they have.
So what you're saying, David, is that these are non-compliance. That was my question, too. I couldn't figure out how to comply with the airport. You're saying that the areas that are out of compliance are at a lower density, and that's why they're out of compliance.
Yeah. They could be designated as open space. They could be designated, I believe, as industrial. But they are largely already privately held and developed with houses at low densities, and that is a non-compliant use relative to the airport.
And we couldn't have an alternative for that designated them. Say it again, what you said before.
You would have to designate those areas that are already developed with people's very low density homes. You'd have to change them to either open space and presume you're going to buy their houses back from them, or as industrial, which probably they don't like very much.
I have a question.
Yes.
Over here, just, when you talk about the village core, village or something, first of all, the Caballo, the little green, it's hard to tell the different colors you have, but if you look up there on number 1, that's Caballo. Those are homes that are on like 1 acre. How did we get the idea to surround those homes and all the other green up that are 1 acre homes with this high density idea? You're talking apartments, really high density in there. It just doesn't seem like a very easy place for transportation, close to shops and everything. Why would you go way out there with high density?
Well, others may be able to speak to that better than I do because I wasn't here when the specific plan was originally developed. But the specific plan has always, since it was first written, had within it the idea that this area, which in all three alternatives has a preponderance of darker colors, that area would become a village core of development for the North Chico area that is in proximity to the airport and is the part of that area that is closest to the rest of the city of Chico. That's a concept that's in the specific plan that exists to date. It's a concept that we've moved forward in all three alternatives, and what we've tried to do here is fine-tune it. Now, that's a place where certainly you could look at an alternative 4 and try and actually, rather than what we've done is get rid of this yellow or chartreuse color in our other two alternatives and make it higher density. I think, going in the direction of your comments, one could add more chartreuse in this area and lessen the densities, not have a village center, and make this an area that's really only lower density. That would be incompatible with the airport plan, not in keeping with the city's comments or this original vision of creating a village center there, but would be consistent with the development that's already in that one neighborhood.
Okay, thank you.
David?
Yes.
Right here. I noticed the flood zone basically bisects that area northeast to southwest, the 710-acre flood zone. And I anticipate no development goes there. And assuming that no development will go up north of there in the Kiefer corridor, why was that acreage even included in the study area? This question is probably a little too late, but...
Well, I don't think, I believe it's not a floodway, but a flood zone, and yes, it is possible to build in a flood zone by elevating above the flood elevation. So I don't think you should assume 100% that it won't be developed. That said, there are the areas that do have the floodwaters, but I don't think it's been the county's belief in the past that that's necessarily going to preclude development either there or to its north, which I think is your comments.
David, is Paul Goslin still here?
Is Paul Goslin still here? Yes.
Paul, could you say something about the VINA BMO subunit and the levels in that subunit for the basin management objectives?
Does that basin come down into Kiefer? Do you want me to talk generally about BMOs? Show of hands, do people know what BMOs are? Okay. And it kind of gets back to some comments about, looking at the impact of development and if there's water available, what impacts are going to occur to those who rely on groundwater. And the county has a program, and there are 16 areas of the county broken up where the users in that area have looked at their groundwater use and historic use and have set levels that indicate what's protective for their groundwater uses. And so each one of these areas, as you've heard this, have been looking at those almost as benchmarks to assess if there is water available and there is water there, how is that going to affect the existing groundwater users in the area. And the BMOs in different parts of the county have had levels that have started to come close or not meet their target levels.
And the current condition of the VINA subunit is?
I think there's one out of 4 or 5 wells that didn't meet their compliance level.
And that is the VINA area does include North Chico, is that right? That's for the record.
It is VINA, yeah, I think it is. Yeah.
So this area is in non-compliance with its BMO levels?
Off the top of my head, I think there's 1 well out of 4 that's in non-compliance.
Since when?
Since April, and we just got the spring monitoring results. We monitor throughout the year and assess compliance with the BMO levels. We also look at historic groundwater levels through our groundwater report. And all of this is in the settings and trends report. And I will have, again, people reference back to this. It's discussed how the BMO process works, the monitoring that's associated with that, in reference to the documents that we have, including the annual groundwater status report.
Would you associate that low compliance, or at least the 1 well, based on a drought year last year and a low percentage this year?
Yeah, generally the the areas that have non-compliance are generally due to the lower precipitation that's been going on?
Mike?
Speaking for the school district, we participated in the development of the North Chico specific plan, and there's been a change in the regulatory environment where that use of the public space in the village core is probably something we wouldn't be able to put a school site in there any longer. So I think that needs to be removed from all three alternatives due to the proximity to the airport. We wouldn't be able to get any state funding for that project.
Do you have any suggestion as to what that site would be, or is that really contingent on what the rest of the village core becomes?
Rather than suggesting what it would be, I just wanted to identify what it couldn't be.
Okay, thank you. Mike?
Well, I think that leads me to ask a question of Mr. Snelling's, and isn't that the land use, the airport land use plan would trump any new project, regardless of whether it was designated as the current specific plan or an amended specific plan? Wouldn't the ALUC plan override it? In other words, if you don't meet the ALUC densities, you don't have a project?
You could get overriding.
While Chuck's coming up, I will say the ALUC plan can be overridden by a 4/5 vote.
Let me just say something about
jurisdiction, in this case, the Board of Supervisors.
The public designation in that village core area is inconsistent currently with the airport land use compatibility plan.
Is inconsistent?
Is inconsistent. So it would be something that would likely need to be redesignated under an alternative. I hope that answers your question.
Looks to me like all three of these options have inconsistencies with the plan, the airport plan. So my question is, doesn't the airport plan override when a development application comes forward for a discretionary approval?
It can, but the discretionary action can also involve an override of the airport land use plan by the Board of Supervisors.
4/5 vote.
Correct.
And they get to lean on the general plan when they do it.
And it should be pointed out that the airport land use compatibility plan, last updated 2000, could also be updated again to arrive at an area of consistency with the county zoning.
But I do want to clarify also, Mike is talking about a second issue as well, which is that state funding requirements and state requirements for school construction are in addition to the airport land use compatibility plan, and those requirements state that no school is to be built within a certain distance of an airport. So even if this were overridden by the Board of Supervisors relative to the airport land use compatibility plan, it would still be inconsistent with the state school siting regulations, and that's the comment that Mike was making. I'm ready whenever anybody wants
I've got a question, actually.
Yes, Tovi.
Is the Chico planning director here still?
Steve. He's outside.
Maybe we could bring him in. I just have one quick question for him, given his memo.
While we wait for Steve, playing into David's fantasies, is there any interest on a significant part of the group to punt on this and say that it's a city annexation before any action gets taken here, and to move on, or do we want to involve ourselves directly in this?
I think we're going to get to that point.
The general plan.
Real quick.
Don't we already have significant development with Sierra Moon and the other Schuster property off of Kiwi Emerald Ranch? Emerald Kiwi, don't we already have?
This, for whatever it's worth, this is an area that the county already has an existing specific plan in it. So if you, I think in other areas you can punt, and I think then you essentially revert back to what is normally agricultural zoning or land use designations. On this one, if you punt, you revert back to the existing county specific plan, which is alternative 1, which does allow for a pretty significant amount of urban development with a village core. And Steve Preston, I think there is...
Steve, I have a question.
There's a question for you.
Yeah, please.
Peterson.
I guess what I'm trying to first understand the boundaries of is in the memo that you gave us tonight, there's a map on page 3, I guess, that shows the City of Chico planning area. And I'm trying to figure out where that planning area is. It's hard to read on this map. Do you know verbally, basically, the boundaries of the Chico planning area? That you could.
called leapfrog.
And I don't know if DC&E staff or if we have a map around here someplace.
Yeah, we have a map that shows the city's sphere, and this is entirely outside the sphere, but you're not asking about the
what
sphere.
I handed out is it's got the city limit boundary, it's got the sphere of influence boundary, and it's got the planning area, the larger boundary. The planning area boundary generally extends south of the city limits, I want to say a mile or two. But the point of the map is to indicate that the study areas that you're considering, including the one you're talking about, and study areas 3, 9, 14, and 16, all lie within the planning area of the city of Chico. So we do have an interest in commenting on these alternatives. Not that we agree with the alternatives. We didn't plan these alternatives, but they're all residing within our planning area.
And I think that's maybe where I misunderstood earlier. So I appreciate you clarifying that. So on this planning area, am I to assume your comment number 1, you say, we respectfully request that the final decision, this is comment number 1, that the final decision on the selection of growth alternatives within the City of Chico's planning area be considered within the context of the Chico General Plan update. So are you saying that from a policy perspective, at least at the staff level, you would prefer that all of the study areas that fall within the planning area be considered as part of your general plan update process?
Correct, and be consistent with the growth alternatives that we are in the process of developing. That any final decision by the county, maybe the CAC moves things forward, but we don't want a final decision by the county locking in growth alternatives that are inconsistent with the ones that we're developing. So it's a timing issue.
But if we simply follow the existing general plan, which is alternative 1, we're not having to punt, and we're following the general plan, which still gives the city their option.
So, Scott, are you ready to go ahead with alternative 1? Scott, you want to vote?
Go ahead.
Okay, so we have a proposal on the floor to go with alternative 1, which is consistent with the existing county general plan and the the North Chico specific plan.
I have a question.
Yes, please.
Question. I can't help but notice every time I drive north on 99 following a heavy rainstorm that there's a foot of water on Highway 99, which eventually finds its way down into Nord and floods the people out down there, the farmers and the people who live in Nord and that sort of thing. How has this problem been addressed in this particular North Chico?
I think that's coming back to the question that was asked by someone else. I've already forgotten. Steve, was it? About this area. The area in here is within FEMA's 100-year floodplain and is right along Highway 99 and is presumably the area you're talking about that tends to flood along the highway. That is an area where if you look at this map, you see there really aren't any roads. There hasn't been much development to date. It is an area that's designated for low-density residential development and could theoretically be subdivided and developed. But in order to develop those lots, you would actually have to raise the development above the flood level, and that could be difficult to do. It's been prohibitive to do so far.
Well, I guess my question is that water goes across the highway and finds its way down and causes problems for farmers on the west side of the highway.
And what's your question there?
Well, what do you do with that water that comes off of the asphalt and off the shingles and that sort of thing?
These are complicated engineering questions. I suppose it's possible that, particularly if development occurred in that area, you could actually capture that water and divert it before it went across the highway and put it into a storm drainage facility so that it wouldn't flow across the properties you're talking about. That would have all sorts of other both biological and hydrological implications that one would have to look at, but I suppose it's conceivable that development could help to solve that flooding problem. Yeah, Richard.
David, I think I'm right. Steve Schuster, got a question for you. Don't you have a development in that area right now? Sierra Moon isn't Sierra Moon your development?
Yes.
Maybe you could tell us how you were required to handle the runoff, because you're right in that.
We're not in the floodplain.
You're not in the floodplain. The Sierra Moon is not in the floodplain. And how about the Kiwi? How about the Kiwi?
We are taping the meeting, so anybody who's speaking.
Sorry to do that. Sorry to put you on the spot, but
that's all right. Sierra Moon's not in the floodplain.
It's not in the floodplain. And the other question I had about Sierra Moon is: are the the houses that you're building in Sierra Moon and conceivably in the Emerald Kiwi Ranch, are they part of the 3,800 number in the North Chico specific plan? So
as far as I know, they are.
Yeah, so some of them are already being built, back to what Jason was saying.
I think that's total build out. A lot of them have already been built. So I'm not sure how many are left to be built, but it's a much smaller number.
It's much smaller than 38. Some of those 3,800 have already been built then. Okay.
I'm pretty sure the 3,800 number is a relatively up-to-date number. That is certainly anything that's under construction or anticipated in the next year or two would be part of the 3,800, but houses that were built 1 or 3 or 5 years ago are not part of the 3,800. And, there's some cutoff there where, we're using the best available data. At the time we did this in November, we might have missed houses that were built last July, but I don't think we missed houses built 2 or 3 years ago. Okay, so we have a proposal on the floor, which is to go with alternative 1, consistent with the existing general plan and specific plan. Mike?
So by leaving the Board of Supervisors specific plan alone, it would be consistent with how we dealt with the areas that had specific plans in previous meetings. It would also be consistent with how we voted relative to planning areas that were within city planning areas by deferring to the city. So I believe that I'm going to support number 1.
Okay. Are people ready to vote?
Vote. Vote.
Vote. All right. Does anybody want to make a second proposal of any sort?
David?
Yes.
Not a second proposal, but on the flood control deal, I remember reading something in that North Chico specific plan as far as when things were developed over toward the Highway 99, that there would be some holding ponds integrated into the landscape, if you will, to hold peak flows somewhat, so that when the rain stopped, and then it went down, it wouldn't be quite the problem it is.
Well, I know that where the city has developed a little bit south of there in northwest Chico being south of North Chico, there has been that pattern proposed and planned. I don't know if that's a component of this specific plan, but I can imagine that it needs to be, although I don't know those details. I don't know if there's a...
That would all be covered under a CEQA analysis or EIR, right?
Exactly, yeah. I guess I want to ask, before we take a vote on this, there was the comment from Mike that this parcel here, which was intended for a school, could not be built. I'm wondering if the proposal intended to say that you would ask staff and the consultants to look for a designation consistent with the intent of the specific plan and redesignate that land.
Perfect.
You meant that, right? Yes.
Okay. Just because it's public doesn't mean that it's going to be schools. There are a lot of designations that fall within public.
Okay, so that wasn't part of the proposal.
I don't know. I'm just wanting clarification that Mike said that schools can't be there.
Right.
The designation is...
I think it is correct that that site in the specific plan was identified for a school. So there may be other, I guess, I'm wanting to leave it up to you. I guess I just don't want to leave this meeting and say, well, why'd you leave that as a public? And we say, well, because you didn't tell us to change it. So,
David, I would add that the committee recommend to the board that they review the compatibility with the airport land use plan and the designated public uses for...
Okay, and we'll try and take a look at that, if not in the next week before we get to the Planning Commission. But I think, so the proposal would be take a look at it, don't put anything that's incompatible, and if it was intended only for a school and only a school is needed, that we would redesignate it for some other use that's compatible with the plan, with the airport plan. Is that acceptable?
Halfway.
You're halfway there?
Well, those of us feel that maybe there's a shortage of public space in the greater Chico urban area, and that maybe that it should stay public, with the understanding that it shouldn't be used for schools, or it can't be used for schools. I guess if the motion is that to the extent possible and compatible with ALUC and the airport plan, that this will remain public for some type of public use, I could go along.
Okay. All right. So keep it public if it can be done so consistent with the airport plan. All right. Any alternative proposals to put on the table? All right. All in favor of the proposal that's been made? I think that's going to be unanimous. Is there anyone abstaining? Is there anyone voting no?
Are you going to count?
Okay, so it's unanimous. Maybe I should count how many of us there are. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16, 17, 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, 23, 24. Is that how many there are here? 24. Move along. We're going to go to study area 3. We'll be done by 2.
2/3.
We have a pool going.
You have a pool?
Actually, you control the final dismissals.
Okay, so study area 3, alternative 1, is the existing general plan, which designates this area for rural residential and allows approximately 100 new homes. Under alternative 2, the majority of the study area would be a mix of residential densities, allowing approximately 3,000 new homes, as well as about 10 acres of retail. And alternative 3 would designate the entire study area for very low density residential, which would allow approximately 200 new homes. The city has indicated that they may consider Belmure to be an urban infill area, although they did early on in our discussions request that there remain options for both rural and urban densities in this area. The city's policy for urban infill areas is about 7 dwelling units per acre, and there was a question raised at one of the city-county meetings, would the residents in that area support that level of residential density? And there was also, the city's also expressed that there's a need to address the green line and where its ultimate location would be. At the open house, we received 23 comments. The vast majority of those comments did prefer alternative 2, and included in that input was the petition that's been noted tonight, which basically supported medium and high density housing and commercial uses, and also indicating that agriculture is no longer viable due to the conflicts with the adjacent residential and urban uses. And then there's also some support for alternative 3 at the public workshop. And we'll open it up for discussion.
Thank you. Yes, Scott.
Well, we also had a petition tonight from over 100 people who said that they did not prefer alternative 2. We've had long discussions about the possibility of this being annexed into the city of Chico. For what it's worth, I went to see my representative in Paradise, Kim Yamaguchi, and I don't think I'm putting words in his mouth when I asked him, I said, and what about Belmure? And he said the supervisors have said they are not going to cross the green line. And when they got together, they were pretty emphatic. And then when we heard from Jane Dolan, I'm just reporting what one supervisor said to me. When Jane Dolan came tonight, she said, well, walkability and transportation is a really important issue, and this may be an appropriate area for the city to consider. So I'm trying to propose an alternative number 4, which is really the citizens of Belmure and the city need to get together and figure out what they want to do with this area.
Well, I hope this would be a friendly amendment. I think that when I dug out the nitrate action plan from, 20 years ago? That we're still limping through the annexations and trying to figure out how to install sewer in places that got developed without them. There's a pretty, stiff test about just how much infrastructure is available now and what a strain any significant development would have on it. And it's close to the city and the like. And I think that what probably makes sense is that if this area is going to be built out, it ought to be built out under the auspices of the city. So I think that the idea of, for us to be able to take another, float another alternative, I would amend yours and say, how about we call it urban reserve and point at Chico and say, City of Chico, it's on you. But I was thinking about what Jason said about what happens when you get to LAFCO and you're trying to sort out the annexation. So even if the county and the city were on the same page with this, is it going to get kinked up there? So I would ask our able staff and able consultant to see if, I can't imagine that this has never happened in the state of California before. And there may have been counties, jurisdictions that have been able to sort out enough joint powers arrangements, letters of intent, kumbaya sessions where everybody says, yes, we really do mean it, to say that, hey, urban reserve, urban densities, urban services, real by God Chico streets and fire and everything else, and goodwill with LAFCO to make it happen. How do we get to that?
Well, I think you essentially were already there last week on the Oroville projects. I think in a couple of cases, and you actually dealt with it in two different ways. In the Foothill area, you went ahead with an alternative that's consistent with the city general plan, and you asked us to include that in your preferred alternative and to count those units. And my understanding was that probably in most cases there you would still want to see it annexed before it was developed at those densities. In other cases, you said, this seems, as I understood it at least, sort of far-fetched enough that we don't want it in the county's general plan. We don't want to count those units, but if the city moves it forward, we're not going to stop the city from doing it. I do think we need you to...
was the step up or step off of.
Yeah, I think particularly when we come back next week and try and tell you how many units you're planning for and how much commercial and industrial growth you're planning for, we really do need to know, if you can tell us, which of those two categories you're putting these in. So I think there's sort of, in a way, two proposals on the floor using the two models you used last week. One is that you say, we've looked at this, we think it's very unlikely that it's an appropriate area for urbanization. We're going to take it out of the plan altogether, and we're going to count it as maybe 100 new units. And that's essentially consistent with alternative one. Or there's another alternative. I don't think any of you are saying, let's just go ahead and urbanize it like alternative two, but I think some of you may be saying, let's make it urban reserve, let's count the potential for up to 3,000 units, but let's very clearly state a policy that says it should only happen either under city jurisdiction or with very strict city-county cooperation and adequate infrastructure.
Well, I think it's different from a place that has a bunch of sewer and water districts running around, extending services and making higher density possible in an unincorporated area. The only way that sewer happens there is somebody puts together some insane sewer district for this 500 acres, or it gets annexed and it operates under the city's auspices. So sewer's there. The transportation infrastructure is an issue. The drainage infrastructure is an issue, and it's part of a larger issue that the city's got to deal with already. So if we say we're saying it's proposing it's urban reserve and needs to be annexed and developed under the city, and yeah, there's units, city pick them, just
I
urban
think
reserve.
If that's your scenario, and in order for us to be able to report back to you what you've done, yeah. I would interpret everything you just said to mean we should put a bigger number rather than a smaller number on the number of units.
No, they've got their own count they're keeping. And they'll tell you what it is, and you can roll it into the county, right?
I don't know that they can give us that count in the next week, and I think you're going to want to know it.
I mean, if we're saying it's in the county, then we're supposed to count it. If we're saying it's likely to be in the city, we're expecting that they will count it.
That's right.
So it's okay if we don't count anything on this particular area.
It's fine with me if you don't count anything, but what you've already directed us to count some stuff in last week's meeting and the week before that you have treated differently. So then you're going to be treating things in two different ways. And you can certainly do that, but you're going to show a lot of development in Greater Oroville, is what you did last week. And some of that probably will only happen if the city annexes it. If you go in this direction on this study area and all the others tonight, you won't count that in Chico, and you'll look like you're projecting that almost all growth in the county is going to occur in Oroville, whereas what you will have actually said is there will be some in Chico, but we're not going to put a number on it because we assume the city's doing it, but we are putting a number on the growth in Oroville, and those will have been two different ways of having counted. So it's fine if you want to count in those two different ways, but it would be a slightly different treatment.
Well, just add a footnote. Just add a footnote saying that that's how it came out.
We can certainly do that.
I would propose that we go with the existing general plan, and when the city wants to annex that area and the people in it agree to be annexed, then they can have their 3,000 homes.
Yeah, after they carve it up into fives and try to get together for a meeting.
Well, it's still in the county, and they got to go through the county process to do that.
We've got one proposal on the floor, very clearly stated by Bruce, and I think pretty much the same as Scott and John are also saying, which is just go with alternative one, count it as 100 or so units. Is that the number, Tanya? About 100?
Yep.
Yeah. And if the city annexes it later and develops it, finds a way to do it, that's fine, but the county's not going to presume it or count it.
Sure.
Richard.
I just have a question for Bob. He does. Sorry to make you walk to the mic. In your canvassing the Belmure area and the open house we had in the same room, you talked about wanting alternative 2, and my question is it seems to make sense to me because of its proximity to the city. Its alternative 2 is reasonable, but like these other gentlemen were saying, only when the city annexes it do you have a sense on whether your compatriots would be in favor of annexation, or would they fight tooth and nail to have the cake and eat it too, have the houses but not be in the city? I mean,
general sense I have from talking to the people who signed the petition that I submitted was that annexation to the city was an inevitable result.
But were they pleased? Would they support that? Or I'm putting you on the spot, but what your general feeling?
General feeling is they would support it because we realize that a couple of points. 3,000 units is the number that was presented. And we don't really think 3,000 is ever going to be the number. We think it's going to be something less than that. So we just accepted alternative 2 as being that was the number that was presented. But if it turned out to be 1,200 or 1,500 or 1,000 or whatever the number turned out to be, it was something along those lines. Annexation into the city was going to be something that was expected, because the only way we would get anything in density here that was going to allow more than 1 acre lots required services. We're never going to get a bunch of septic systems in here. The services were going to come from the city. There's already sewer and water that approaches Belmure from 2 different sides. So it was going to be a requirement, basically. The city would say, yeah, this makes sense. Let's go do it. We don't know if it's 1,000 or 1,500 or 2,000. 3,000 seems like a lot for us, but we think some number of development makes sense. We think city services are going to be required to do that, and we think annexation into the city is something that inevitably is going to happen.
Sue?
I got some phone calls on this petition yesterday. I happen to know quite a few people who have lived in this area for years, and all they heard was 3,000 homes when they signed this petition. And I said, well, now wait a minute, and I went to see some of them today, and they were pretty happy with the 200 new homes, but they also said that they felt for the area to continue to be economically feasible that it should include some retail. But they didn't understand what they were signing when they signed this. I mean, I'm just telling you that as a piece of information.
What petition are you talking about? Are you talking about this one or the first one?
Yes, I'm talking about that. I'm talking about this one that we were handed tonight. Their names are on there. I'm not going to say who they are. But anyway, what they wanted was, they were talking about the 200. I showed them this. And but they wanted some retail in there also for economic reasons.
So you're essentially suggesting alternative 3, but with the retail component from alternative 2. Is that correct?
Yes, but I don't have any problem with what was just said about, being part of the city.
All right.
The only problem with alternative 3 is it moves the green line, and I think the green line ought to stay where it is until that area is annexed into the city.
It can't happen that way.
Huh?
It can't happen that way.
Well,
as far as I understand, you can't annex past the green line.
You can. You go through a LAFCO vote.
I'm sure they would approve that.
Well, that's the process.
This area is in the land use element currently, and it's designated a study area, and it defines how it gets out, and by a simple majority vote of supervisors, they can move the green line. So if the annexation process starts, that can be an integral part of it to where it can all happen at once.
This is where maybe having a vision and clearly enunciated policies would be a good guidance to us in considering this area. In 1992, as John Luvas can tell you, the city of Chico, in updating its general plan, looked at this area. It looked at this area very seriously because the guiding principle for the development of Chico was that there be a compact urban area with clearly defined, well-defensible borders. You've heard that spoken tonight, that Mud Creek might make one of those clearly defined borders, as would Highway 32. And so the idea was that rather than continuing the pattern of rural development that John was speaking about, that this might be better incorporated into the city as part of an efficient growth area, incorporating many of the smart growth principles that we've all at least spoken somewhat in favor of. I understand what the motion is. I think what the city did in 1994 when it adopted the general plan, it left this as a study area, so it punted. The motion tonight is to punt. Let's punt. I'm not certain that makes good planning. I think that if we were to adopt one of the alternatives here, if the city were to annex, the city might very easily be able to find support by LAFCO if the general plan of the county and the general plan of the city happen to be consistent on this area. I think there are very strong reasons why we should consider Alternative 2, even though I know it's not popular with many of the residents out there.
So, Jeff,
David?
can I take that as a proposal to put Alternative 2 on the table as well? And I believe with the caveat that it would actually that the development would only occur under city auspices or with very close coordination with the county and adequate sewer and water. But so it's not Alternative 2 can go and be developed tomorrow under the county jurisdiction. It's Alternative 2 either after annexation or with very, very close coordination with the county. So we've got two proposals on the table at this point. Bruce's proposal to go with Alternative 1 and Jeff's proposal to go with Alternative 2 with that clear understanding that it's only with annexation.
Make that an Alternative
Todd
4?
and then Tovey.
I'm for the punting, as you say, back to the city, because I believe this should happen under city auspices. But the concern of having it while it's in this never land, having it carved up to where it is incompatible with annexation. To what degree is that a real fear? And should we be looking more at Jeff's?
No.
I don't know, maybe, Scott, that's what you were going to address or something. I was guessing that.
Well,
I can try and comment on that a little. You know, we did work on the Northwest Chico specific plan for the city, which is immediately adjacent to this area. That area is currently designated for 5-acre parcels. There has been some subdivision, although my understanding is that the subdivisions down to 5-acre parcels, which is the minimum size you can go to, have not been as frequent or common in recent years. So I think there's a potential for seeing that further subdivision over time under Alternative 1, and that continues even under something like Alternative 2 as stated, because the zoning for smaller lots wouldn't be in place immediately. But my guess is that as long as the owners who are in there continue to see the possibility of subdivision to urban densities in the nature of Alternative 2, and if that possibility is out there 5 or 10 years from now, probably most who are interested in that kind of development wouldn't subdivide down to 5s, which makes that more difficult over time. So I think in either case, you haven't actually seen a lot of that subdivision, but the proposal that Jeff's made is probably a little more a step towards ensuring that that subdivision doesn't happen more.
If I could just make one quick comment, the data that we have right now shows that roughly...
You know, I'm sorry, I actually have to make sure. I would only want to call on you if a CAC member asked for it, otherwise we set a precedent.
Let him talk.
Okay. I hope the committee understands. We otherwise are going to have a lot of folks wanting to address us.
We just did a survey of the area, and the data that we have, and I won't say it's God, but I think it's pretty accurate, that roughly 2/3 of the parcels in the Belmere area are already under 3 acres, and about 40% of them are less than 1 acre.
But so that's the count of parcels, or is that the acreage?
That is the acreage. The count of parcels, about 40% count are less than 1 acre, and 2/3 of the number of parcels are less than 3 acres. There are very few 5, 10, and 20-acre parcels. So that's the only comment I want to make.
Okay, I believe, Tovey, you had something, and maybe Sue.
Yeah, thank you. We all got this map on our table, and I think it's instructive to take a quick look at this map to look at study area number 3 so that we understand where this sits in the context of the city of Chico. It's surrounded on 3 sides by the city of, well, I guess on 2 sides at least by the city of Chico, on 3 sides by at least the sphere of influence. The area immediately north of study area 3 is an area called the Mud Creek area. And that area is what the city actually right now is, that's a part of their feasibility study for where they want to grow. That's something they're considering today, and they've had studies done on this for years now. So I appreciate this question of what happens to the land in the meantime. But we could have had that question on any of the study areas in Paradise or in Gridley or any of the other areas. And I think this petition is actually on point. This very last bullet point here is, and this is 133 folks. There are 3 alternatives on the table. Alternative 1 is 100. Alternative 2 is 3,000. And alternative 3 is 200. That's what we have. Now, we can change that from our recommendation, but right now, that's what's on the table. And these folks said, 133 people signed this petition and said, finally, we recognize that some growth may occur in Belmere. And it sounds to me like actually there's consensus on this point right here. However, from our perspective, this area should be viewed no differently than the areas of Biggs and Gridley, where the CAC recommended leaving the existing general plan designations in place and urged the cities to take the lead on the urbanization. I guess it seems to me inconsistent to try to do something other than that based on what we've done in Gridley Biggs and in Paradise. We ought to be consistent. And, well, one final thing. It's actually consistent with the policy that the city of Chico laid out. They said, look, here's our urban planning area. Belmere sits in that planning area. And their number one comment says that as you think about decisions about study areas within that Chico planning area, those should be left to the City of Chico general plan update process. Mm-hmm. So I guess I would echo, some earlier comments, which is leave it existing general plan. It's consistent with decisions we've made in other parts of the county. It's consistent actually with the desire at least of one petition, and it sounds like if both sides recognize it's going to be in the city, let's let the city deal with it. And that's what I have to say.
So let's vote.
All right. So I think we've got two proposals on the floor. One is to leave as designated in the current.
Scott McNullen and I have had our hand up from the beginning.
Okay. Sorry, Jason.
I defer to Jason.
I want to strongly support alternative 2. There are several reasons alternative 1 won't work on a practical level when it comes to development. First of all, I don't believe the county will allow 100 more septic tanks. I think there's a nitrate problem there. I think it has to be addressed under the auspices of city infrastructure levels. Alternative 2, I think, naturally identifies this area as a growth area because of the parcels that have already been created, which you can, as I understand it, Planning Commission is not approving any more separate or subdivisions out there. And as Toby is moving forward, I think there's a lot of politics here, and I know you all know that there's a lot of politics here. Growth Area 1 and Belmere cannot happen without each other. You cannot do anything in Belmere without Growth Area 1 happening, and let me tell you why.
That's Growth Area 1.
Individual parcel owners cannot afford the infrastructure. They cannot. It will never happen. Alternative 1 and Alternative 3 is a vote for nothing, I think. And I think Alternative 1 specifically is a vote for nothing because it creates the exact same hurdles we are experiencing today, which is total politics.
So are you suggesting another alternative
It's not in front of us right now.
But the city wants to do it, though.
Yeah.
And they say in their policy that's what they want to do.
Yeah.
They want to do what?
They want us to request that any final decision on a selection of a growth alternative within the City of Chico's planning area, which this is.
So are you supporting Mud Creek?
Be considered within the context of the Chico General Plan update process.
Let me ask you, are you supporting the Mud Creek area then?
It doesn't matter what I support. I'm showing you what the city says they want to do. I'm not on the city council. I'm just a volunteer like everybody else here. But I'm saying that they're saying that this is a growth area in their planning area.
And I fully support the growth area.
And they want to do, and they want to plan.
So my personal feeling as your facilitator is that you're all talking about, and it's only a few of you actually, talking about these same 2 points and a back and forth about them. And I hear other people who aren't commenting saying they're ready to vote.
I have one more comment, and then I'll end.
Yeah, and then I'd really like to limit it to anybody who thinks they have something new to add to the discussion, and then I think the 2 options are on the table, and
absolutely.
We're probably ready to choose them.
In regards to the petition, there are 2 petitions in front of us. As I understand it, the petition to recommend was given specifically to the parcel owners within the side of this area. The petition not to recommend was given to the entire area, and I can already see addresses that have nothing to do with this area. So weighting them next to each other does not apples to apples.
Okay, and Jason, overall, you're speaking in favor of this alternative 2 with the caveat that it will happen under city jurisdiction.
Absolutely.
All right, Richard, and then Jeff, and then maybe we'll vote.
I just have a a small request that we do not call it Alternative 2, that we call it Alternative 4, because Alternative 2 is so emotionally charged between the two factions in the Belmure area, and it's really not Alternative 2 because we're putting caveats. So it's really.
Okay, I'm sorry. We are also just going to have to use shorthand. So you would like us to say
Alternative 4
that includes the development that was in Alternative 2, but which is not Alternative 2, and instead is that development
now it's Alternative
with this additional
4.
caveat. That will add a lot of paper, but we can certainly.
And if I can quickly clarify that the City of Chico on page 3 also provides specific comments about the Belmure area, indicating that it has a severe concern about parcelization in the interim, and Alternative 2 is a preferred option.
Okay. All right. So
are you ready to vote?
No, we're not. Yeah, vote. We're not, because he just brought something up that needs to be responded to, with all due respect. There's a conflict then between the policy and your recommendation. So maybe Steve can provide some additional guidance on what the city proposes that the county do in this area.
Steve, do you want to respond to that?
They have suggested two different things.
We're talking now about Belmure. Okay. What a fun topic. The comment letter only is from the perspective of the three alternatives that you're considering. If you're going to look at possible areas for urbanization or intensification of residential with a commercial core, we think it does make some sense. We're not endorsing specifically Alternative 2, but we think of the three that you're looking at, it might make the most sense. Certainly, if the city was to annex the area, it would annex it onto the condition that it would be urbanized. We wouldn't want to annex an area with 1-acre lots. It doesn't make any sense. If it comes into the city, we also make the comment in the letter that we, the city, looked at the area north of there, Mud Creek, as another opportunity area to be planned in combination with Belmure. We think it makes it more economically feasible from an infrastructure standpoint. So we view it part of a larger area that we may be looking at in our general plan update. But it's really your decision. Obviously, annexation requires majority support from if it's a registered voter area. They'd actually have to have an election out there, and we would have to work with the citizens regardless of what land plan we work on. So.
Well, that seems pretty reasonable.
All right. Are you all ready to vote yet?
Vote.
Yeah. All right.
It seems kind of a shame to give the people in that area an expectation that they can have 3,000 homes when they really can't until they're annexed to the city.
That's just a number. Doesn't
well, I know, but I'm just making a comment.
Okay. Are we done with comments and ready to vote?
Yes. No. We're not done with comments. I'm sorry. I would recommend that we expand Study Area 3 to include Mud Creek and roll it all in one vote, because if that's the way the city's looking at it, we should look at it that way.
The supervisors will never agree to move the green line to Mud Creek.
And if I'm not mistaken, you actually had a study area that extended at least. I'm sorry, could I have the floor for a moment? You actually had a study that included at least a part of what's now called the Mud Creek area. Yep. The supervisors actually specifically asked you to remove it from study. So given that fact and the fact that we really are not in a position to give you analysis of additional study areas at this time, I'd certainly discourage you.
It's going to get studied in the city. I mean, we're punting the whole thing.
We're advisory to the supervisors, and the supervisors took Mud Creek off the table. Right. So I don't think it's productive to try to put it back in.
John, do you want to put an alternative proposal on the floor?
It's not what I'm going to vote for, but it sounded like people had an appetite for it, so I figured, what the hell?
Okay, I don't think anybody but you even wants to put it on the table. So if you weren't planning to vote for it either, I think we should probably move on.
Yes.
All right. We're going to vote. So, do people understand the two options?
Yep.
Okay, how many are in favor of keeping it as Alternative 1 with the statement that if the city does want to annex it and develop it, that is not counter to county policy? All in favor?
I'm sorry, Alternative 1, say that again, please.
Alternative 1, 100 units, but it's okay if the city develops it in the future. 1, 2, raise your hands because I'm going to count. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. And how many in favor of alternative 2 with the clear caveat, we're going to call it 2 or 4, and with the clear understanding that it has to be done under city auspices or in some other very close coordination with the county? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15. Are there abstentions or alternative points of view? No. Okay, I want to try and do one more before another break, so maybe we'll gain some momentum. Is that okay? Good.
Okay, study area 4 is Forest Ranch. On this slide, you can see alternative 1.
Could I ask people who are leaving or otherwise disposed to not talk? It really will help us to be able to move forward. Thank you.
So alternative 1 for study area 4 is the existing general plan, which designates the majority of the area for medium density residential, allowing approximately 1,500 new homes. This also has a retail core, similar to what we found in Berry Creek last week, an area that is really undefined, but near the town center. Alternatives 2 and 3 are the same, and it would change the residential designation to agriculture, but keep the retail designation from alternative 1. At the open house, we received 5 comments about the Forest Ranch study area. The majority supported no or limited growth, which would be consistent with alternatives 2 and 3. There was also a suggestion to require sustainable timber harvesting to go along with the agriculture designation. There was a suggestion to expand the study area, as well as a suggestion to identify growth boundaries based on slope, fire management activities, and forest productivity. And so we'll open it up for discussion.
Questions, comments, proposals?
I move we vote, and I propose 2 or 3.
Okay.
Second.
Could we add to fix the bullet like we did in Bangor?
Yeah, I was going to mention, buried in the ill-named link buried on your page through a secondary access that a lot of us missed, in the 88-page PDF document called comment cards, was Ed's nicely written letter. Not a comment card, but a typed letter that talked about the area being arbitrary as the perimeter was, just as what you just mentioned. And so I would make a motion that any motion we do refers to it more as the general community and not the lines designated on the map.
Okay, so in other words, the proposal is, and I apologize, I'm not sure we actually know this, but you're saying if this area of medium density residential extends further than the study area, you actually want to redesignate all of it and not just the area within the boundary that we've drawn. Is that what you're saying, Todd? Yes, okay. And I think also you're also saying as part of this proposal that this red blob should get reconfigured to actually follow parcel lines and to be those parcels that are most appropriate for actual retail development. And that's the proposal on the table.
The 20 acres.
Excuse me, Scott? Maybe you can use the microphone.
It's not subject to flooding.
You didn't want to use the microphone, but I think you said that it's not subject to flooding. Okay.
The 20 acres of retail makes no sense at all that I can see, and I don't know why it's in there.
Okay. Are you suggesting that the proposal is that there be no retail, or that we contract it to designate a few parcels for retail?
Well, I understand right now there's one general store, so obviously that's retail, but so that would be, you couldn't say no retail at all, but 20 acres is ridiculous.
Okay, so maybe the proposal on the floor is to designate only the site of the existing general store as retail and to designate the rest for agriculture. Is that the proposal?
No.
No.
It's been designated as retail for 20 years, and and they haven't done it yet. I'd say just leave it.
Go 2 or 3.
Well, that's very different from what you did in Bangor. In Bangor, you did ask us to designate a few parcels roughly commensurate with the blob.
Yeah, but isn't the motion on the floor number 1 as it stands right now?
No, the proposal on the floor is number 2 and 3.
Sorry.
To redesignate it for very low density for ag, which does allow one house per lot. So your proposal is to redesignate for ag, which allows one house per lot, and some of you said do something with the retail, but I'm not sure what that something is.
It currently says maintain the 20 acres of retail. If there's already 20 acres zoned for retail, who are we to say, no, you can't have that?
Well, you're the same people who told us last week to redesignate it and contract it in Bangor. That's who you are. And maybe, but I think here you're saying that you don't want to do that and you'd like to leave the ill-defined 20-acre blob.
Yeah, just leave it. I mean,
just leave it, okay. This is how great policy is made. Okay, so we're going to leave it the way it is, an ill-defined 20-acre blob.
Yes.
Yes, that's the proposal. All right. Any counter proposals to that? Okay, all in favor? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11. This is everybody, right? Is there anybody voting differently?
I just abstained because
You're abstaining? For 2 abstentions. I will promise you that next week I'm going to ask you, did you really mean to treat Bangor and, where are we? Forest Ranch differently with regard to the retail designations?
We just wanted you to go to Bangor and see where, we just wanted you to go to Bangor and see where it is.
It was just a trick. Okay. Well, that was so fast. Do you want to do one more before a break?
Sure.
Yes. We're going to do one more because we like momentum.
No. It's going to be a big one. No.
All right, let's turn to study area 6. This is Upper Stilson Canyon. Alternative 1 is the existing general plan. The majority of this area is in agriculture, as well as some rural residential, which is the lighter colored green on that slide. This would allow approximately 100 new homes. Under Alternative 2, the entire study area would be designated for resource conservation. Under Alternative 3, this is similar to a preliminary development proposal that was submitted to the county in our alternatives development process. It would designate the area for low-density residential, some retail. You can see the 2 red areas along Highway 32, and also resource conservation. And the intent, I think, was to cluster the development as much as possible. And the proposal included possible agricultural uses, including a vineyard and agricultural tourism and trail development. This would allow approximately 600 new homes. The city provided a small amount of input on the study area, specifically identifying the need for fire safety and the need for primary and secondary access points. And at the open house, we received 13 comments about the study area. The majority of them preferred Alternative 2, and 2 preferred Alternative 1. There were concerns raised about the possible development in Alternative 3 and its impacts on water supply, wastewater, open space preservation, groundwater recharge, and biological resources. There were 3 comments that supported some level of development that is greater than Alternative 1, citing the need for smart growth practices. And we'll open it up for discussion.
I have a question. All 3 alternatives rated D on critical winter range for deer herds. How can that be? One having no development and one having 600 home development.
I think Joanna may be able to speak to this better, but I think that there was the idea of the resource conservation use, including recreational uses, which could potentially impact biological resources like deer herd habitat.
I move Alternative 2.
All right, we have a proposal on the floor for Alternative 2. Before we move to that, I want to just state that it's my understanding, although I haven't actually had access to it, but you had a presentation, a couple of speakers this evening who pointed to a document that John has in his hands, and I believe they referred to it as an Alternative 4. I'm personally not clear how it's different from all Alternative 3. Certainly our intent was to reflect what we understood these landowners' desires to be reflected in Alternative 3. So maybe some of you reading it can see the difference between Alternative 3 and what they've called Alternative 4. Well, maybe you want to get clarification on that, or maybe you just want to vote on the proposal, which is Alternative 2.
Well, I want to, excuse me, I want to speak to either Alternative 3 or 4, to support that. One of the things, 30-some years ago, I remember when Ed Simmons had horses in Canyon Oaks on the golf course. And, that was way up there in that canyon, and it was horses. And since then, we built it into a golf course, and we have thousands of people living up there, and they all, when we have people call our office looking for property, they always want to live up in Canyon Oaks. And I think that, that was probably 30 years ago, and we're sitting here on a general plan looking at something, trying to look ahead another 30 years. And I love the idea of the vineyard. I love the idea of doing something with this vineyard that's been in there 25 years or so. I think it's beautiful property. I've been up on it many times. I think that people, they say there's 31 flavors of ice cream, and not everybody wants a house downtown. Not everybody wants a house on the park. Not everybody wants a house out on Kiefer Road on 5 acres. A lot of people like the foothills. Canyon Oaks is really popular. The homes up there on an acre, that foothill development. And more and more people are wanting that. And maybe right now is not the time for them to develop this, but certainly we're sitting here today talking about a 20, 30-year plan and looking at where would we put those home sites in 10, 20, and 30 years. And I think that this is a great area. You've got Highway 32, you've got access. They have a plan here on their number 4 for the second entrance and exit, fire, water. I think that we have to look 20 and 30 years from now at beautiful home sites up in the foothills, because the demand will be there for that. And I think this is a great site to work with.
I really want to say, I'm sorry, Georgie, I absolutely do not agree with you. I'm a citizen of Paradise. I know I've lived there only 14 years. If I choose to drive to Paradise Pines, that drive from Paradise Pines to Lower Paradise is now, during rush hour, extended to almost a half an hour. It takes approximately 1 hour to get from Magalia down to Chico. People I have known who have moved to Magalia because they said it was absolutely beautiful have sold and moved back to Chico because of transportation. That is a 2-lane road. And trying to secure the variance to expand that road to a 4-lane road all the way to Magalia, it increases urban sprawl. It goes against the principles we've set for compact urban growth. We have already proposed a score of houses in Oroville, and we just proposed alternative 2 for Chico and Belmere, which, if developed, would be possibly 3,200 homes. Fire on the ridge is a problem. Every meeting we have had in which we've talked about the ridge, fire is a problem. I also give you another interesting statistic, that if you go above 1,500 feet in Paradise and on the ridge, 70% of the parcels are owned by absentee owners. So for those of us who live in Paradise, I really focus on alternative number 2.
Okay, Scott, wait a minute.
Canyon Oaks is not Chico.
Okay, but this is on Highway 32. It doesn't go up to Magalia or Paradise.
David?
I'd like to actually propose splitting the baby of Georgie and
Okay,
and
can I hold on just for a minute before we split babies and make a third proposal? Let's just, the 2 proposals on the floor right now, this is study area 6. And we've got one proposal from Scott to accept alternative 2, which is all resource conservation, right? Yes.
I'm focused on 5.
He was talking to the wrong one. I'm sorry.
Yeah.
Okay, we did 5 2 weeks ago. Okay, so do we have a proposal on the floor for alternative 2?
I have a question before we.
No, I don't want to. I'm sorry. I'm trying to backtrack.
I will give you a proposal for number 2.
Okay, we have that on the table. That's all I want right now.
No,
okay?
Can I have a question too?
No, we're going to come back.
You'll come back to my question.
Yes. So there is a proposal on the floor for alternative 2, which is resource conservation. There's a proposal on the floor to do something, and I need clarification on this, to either do alternative 3 or alternative...
Who thought it was another proposal? Scott, would you do us a favor and withdraw your proposal?
No, Richard has
proposal.
Reaffirmed that exists. Okay, now George, I'm sorry, could I have your attention, please?
I was trying to defend the traffic in Magalia. I don't know how I'm going to defend the traffic in Magalia. This is Highway 32 going up to Forest Ranch.
Okay, great. Okay, so there is a first proposal on the floor from Richard, not from Scott, for alternative 2, resource conservation. There is a second proposal on the floor, which I need to have clarified, which is either, Georgie, please, for either alternative 3, which I know what it is, or for the applicant's alternative 4, which they seem to have stated that it's different from alternative 3, but I'm not sure how. Is there anybody in this room who can clarify?
Yes.
Okay, I don't want your third alternative. I want to know what Georgie's proposie is.
What I was going to give you was what they proposed.
You're going to tell me Georgie's proposal?
No, I was going to tell you the Hall and Isom proposal.
Okay, but Georgie, is your proposal alternative 3 or the Hall Isom proposal?
Well, I like number 4, but I'm willing to go with number 3 if it makes it simpler for people so they don't confuse it with
alternative 3
Magalia.
is on the table, and now John is going to explain a third alternative, which he thinks is Hall Ison's alternative 4.
Yes.
Okay, great.
They're quite specific in saying that, you know, in trying to take the best guess, you kind of overshot the retail by a factor of 10. So the retail would be reduced. They make a very good case for the issue of clustering necessary for both the services, for fire safety, for the trail connections and the like. And what I get reading this is that you could probably vote alternative 3 and the thing would turn into what they're proposing under a more careful planning effort. So at the scale of a general plan, some development up there recognizing the vineyard and recognizing the transportation limits and everything else. Okay. By the time it's all over and done with, there's probably 100, 150 units up there just as a function of trying to get it done. Their proposal still stands at 600, but I don't think you can get there with the approach that they're saying they want to take.
Okay, so what you'd like to put on the table is alternative 3 revised to an alternative 4 that has 10% as much retail but still has a maximum of 600 units provided they're clustered and carefully planned.
Yes.
No, I don't think that.
Yes.
I realistically don't think 600 units is
Okay, give me a number for your proposal.
I would say at the upper limit, 300.
300. Okay, so alternative 4 is not 10% less, but 10% as much, which are two very different things.
Like 3 acres.
10% as much retail, which is 3 acres, to be clear. 3 acres of retail and 300 units. Georgia, do you want to rescind alternative 3 or you want to keep it on the table?
No, I'll rescind it. I think that 3 acres might be kind of small when you're thinking like of a vineyard winery kind of thing, but if 3 acres is enough, the county can feel that 3 acres.
Well, actually, they've identified it in terms of square footage.
Oh, they have?
So,
okay, great. I'll go with that.
Okay. So alternative 2 is on the table, and alternative 4, which is a 3-acre retail and 300 units. Richard, and because I said I would come to you, we'll go.
Okay, I just have a question about something that's confused me about all these study areas that are very contentious. The ones that are up in the foothills, and the Stringtown one comes to mind last week. We have these proposals that haven't really been vetted by DC&E. That have said, you know, we're going to do this, and they all sound, wow, this sounds great. What is the, when we take a developer's proposal, and I'm not picking on any developer because they, you know, they're beautiful packets, what is to say that this is actually what we see is what we're going to get if we say, yay, alternative 4? And is there any mechanism for making sure that that's an accurate...
Yeah, way after the general plan's adopted
right.
and all
and then
the stuff.
The follow-on question that I have, and not for you, John, is if we put something into resource conservation now, are we saying it's going to be that way in perpetuity, or are we saying let's put this in the bank, so to speak, and maybe we can spend it in 15 years. Can these study areas be revisited by the board of directors when we say, yes, there's a real pressing need, like Georgie said, for foothill homes? Maybe we could do it then, and this is just a precautionary principle. Let's put something into resource conservation now and then come back to it when we need it.
Yes, on all counts.
Yes.
So, which is to say, yes, actually, we have looked at these proposals. We did actually try and make our alternatives as close as we understood them to what the landowners had suggested. Yes, we actually evaluated those things in our evaluation. Many of the owners have come back to you and said, we don't agree with the evaluation, and here's our evaluation. And in some cases, I think you've believed us, and in some cases, you've believed them. That's your prerogative. But it would be incorrect to think that we never looked at their proposals. We actually did, and we evaluated them in the booklet that you have where they're consistent with our alternatives. You have a number of people coming back to you and saying, well, we'd like to fine-tune it, we'd like to clarify it, and by the way, here's also our evaluation, and everything DC&E said wouldn't work about this, they were wrong, and in fact our proposal is great and it'll work wonderfully. If I were a developer or an applicant, I'd do that as well. All that said, what you're looking at are basic land use designations. On the one hand, you don't have a guarantee that the thing that would actually be built would be exactly consistent with what they've written up in their document. On the other hand, it will be subject to specific review at the time it's actually proposed, and that process will probably result in looking at things a lot like what you're seeing. And that leads to the fact that you could do either of the two things your comment suggested. You can either designate it now and still look at it in detail when it's actually proposed, or you can, as you said, put it in the bank and require a general plan amendment later if they want to move forward with it. Right. It's really a question of how close you feel like you are to wanting to have it move forward.
But
now.
I think one of the reasons we're on this general plan and looking at 2030 is we're asked to look out
Absolutely.
to 2030, not to ask some people 15 years from now to look again.
Yeah. Emily has been very patient.
Yeah, I think, and I'm sorry I didn't beat this gong a lot sooner, but I've given you the chance to not be annoyed with me. I think if we're serious about looking 25 or 30 years ahead, are we imagining that gas is going to be cheap and plentiful then? Or I just don't see how lovely homes in the foothills are going to get more and more popular as fuel gets more and more expensive, and so it seems like alternative 2 is kind of the most logical, and it can always be changed later.
Okay. Bruce?
Well, I think, just to be consistent, we ought to put alternative 1 on the table. To quote the City of Chico's memorandum, the most realistic development scenario for this study area is alternative 1.
So you'd like to put that on the table as well?
Yeah.
Okay, so we've got alternative 2, alternative 3 modified to 4, and now alternative 1 on the table because the city appears to say in its memo that it's most realistic. Further comments, discussion?
Yeah, Dave. Let me put a caveat out here, just a public notification. I have no title or ownership or interest in the land, though it is in my family. And so I'm going to make comments. I've talked with Tim and Joanne about making comments, but I will not be voting. So the comments I want to make is if I really want to be selfish and have an interest in this, I would suggest that you go ahead and go for alternative number 2, because our families have been together for decades and decades on here, and with my father's passing recently and a lot of changes as generations go on, one thing that's unified them into doing something what they consider very good and transferring possibly or making available thousands of acres across the street from Bidwell Park into perpetuity as open space. A lot of that's galvanized them into doing this work, which is a significant amount of work, and the commitment to continue this on through other generations is this whole concept of doing this. Prior to being activated to this, there was the thought of liquidating. And, you know, if it goes to 2, it gets liquidated. That's going to move it in money through the family that much sooner, and maybe I'll see a piece of it before my children do. You guys voted into number 3. It's going to be a long-term plan. I guarantee you I won't see a penny of it. My children will see it, and, you know, I'm hoping it would be a good plan. But the concern I have is that once the family liquidates it, this large tract, which has been held together by friendship over decades, will be carved up first into the 160s, the 80s, and in 30 years, pressure on land that close to Chico, that close to Bidwell Park, will be every time there's a chance they'll be trying to break that up into smaller and smaller and smaller units. And we're going to end up with parcelization up there because a parcelization that would never happen under the alternatives that you can look at now, which is to deal with it as a whole thing. And me, as a lifelong environmentalist, I'm kind of looking at, I'd rather see an overall control with it and a chance for Chico to prosper rather than a real long-term parcelization, which that was kind of my question earlier. What happens when you put things out there in no man's land? It gets parcelized. And anyway, I'll leave it at that and make no further comments.
What alternative are you for?
I'm for the presentation here, which has quite a bit of land that will be left, I think up to 2,400 acres left in
4.
Well, it's I'm with you. It's in effect 3 with some changes.
Jeff.
3.5. I'm impressed with the proposal, and I'm strongly in support of the Hall-Eisen proposal. I'm confused by the process. We are drafting a general plan that looks at the county basically from a bird's eye view, and is intent on establishing general policies that discuss what land uses are appropriate where. And this study area and the next few study areas we're going to be looking at seem to be confusing that process with presentation of specific plans. And I'm concerned. I want to make certain that in devising a general plan for the county, we are not being swayed by specific plans, which may or may not hold sway when we get around to seeing the final application that comes before us. This is a great, it has much of what Bill Broward offered back in 1994-95 with Bidwell Ranch, and I hate to throw that name out because it was a specific plan. It offered great open areas, but it had perhaps a bad location and a terrible connotation. How can we assure, and I think I know the answer, how can we assure in going with Alternative 4 that this specific plan is incorporated in the general plan?
Well, let me try and answer that for you. I would suggest 3 ways you could do it, 2 of which you've already put on the table. One would be to go with Alternative 2, leave it as resource management, and have an implicit statement but not explicit in your general plan that if somebody later wants to come in and ask for a general plan amendment, they would essentially do it by proposing that current plan as a bona fide specific plan under the law that would get implemented, would get adopted as a whole and become a binding document, and the land use designations could only change there in the future. I think that's essentially what Richard was talking about, having it in the back pocket. That's one approach that would answer your question, Jeff. A second approach is that if you feel like this has moved along well enough and you feel like you understand the concepts and they're probably ready to move forward, you might just go ahead with this Alternative 4, Alternative 3 as modified, and understand that what you're putting in place here is going to come to fruition. That's on the table already. A third alternative that I think is not on the table is essentially that you would keep the underlying designation as resource management, but you would put some sort of overlay over it, a specific plan overlay, and state that the county by policy would welcome a specific plan application that would meet the following criteria. I think many of you are in support of the concepts you see in this presentation from the owners. We could summarize that as a series of policy points and say that a specific plan can be developed for this area and would be expected to follow the criteria that we would lay out as policy.
And that could be offered as a friendly amendment to Alternative 4.
Do the makers of Alternative 4 want to create that, want to modify it, or you want to make an Alternative 5?
No, as modified.
As modified. So Alternative 4 is to designate it resource management, but put a specific plan overlay on it, allowing a future specific plan application that follows the kinds of policies that you see in the document from the owners. So we're modifying Alternative 4 to be like, to have that component. Bill.
My only disagreement with the characterization of the number of units represented in the Hall and Isom family's proposal is they represented 675, and Alternative 3 is 600. John wants to cut that number in half, and I'm really for Alternative 3 as it sits because it's more closely aligned to their plan, except for the retail.
Okay, so now we actually do have 2 proposals on the floor. Let's just leave them both on the floor for now. So, boy. We're going to call Bill's Alternative 3 just to be, for lack of another number. But Alternative 3 we're going to assume still has the specific plan overlay component. It's as shown up here, but only to be approved under a specific plan and with the policies shown by Hall Ison. Alternative 4 is the one articulated by John, which has the same specific plan overlay, but has 300 units instead of 600. So they're essentially the same, but Alternative 3 has 600 units, Alternative 4 has 300 units.
I'm sorry, I lost you. Which one has the designation resource conservation?
2.
I thought
they both have an underlying designation of resource conservation.
So both 3 and 4
have
functionally have resource conservation, with the caveat that we are going to try and develop policies that will specifically encourage development of the property as per this.
Yes, exactly.
But they are resource conservation right now.
Yes.
They're in the back pocket
until that specific plan is developed and approved. Yes, and thank you for clarifying that. I did not say it well. Okay, Mike.
We, the General Plan 2030 update, have asked the public to participate. We've asked the large landowners to tell us what you'd like to do. We've brought them into this process. They've responded by giving us very rough concepts. I like the idea of the specific plan overlay. I wish we'd have had this concept better at the Oroville process, where we took the 2 specific plan overlays and yanked them.
Next week.
Well, having said that, I think that I trust our development process to shake out what complies with environmental law, what complies with circulation and groundwater and all of the things that Tim and his staff will be responsible for when an application comes forward. And I also trust that the people that have participated at our request have some clarity of what their vision is and will in fact follow through with it. By putting the specific plan overlay, we can let go of it. We can trust that the process is going to work, that it goes through the full reviews, that the development community is clear that that's what they have to do. And as we unfold our processes and revisit this and give our Planning Commission and our board our recommendations, they will get it. They will see that, okay, this is an area that if it's done right can have the potential of doing something. Doesn't mean, and as Supervisor Dolan said, no entitlements, no expectation beyond we're going to let you move forward and see what shakes out. And so I support the leaving what the proposal that they have and the numbers that they have with the specific plan overlay will produce the results that we all say we want.
Okay, so that's what we're at this point calling Alternative 3. It's a resource management designation with a specific plan overlay allowing 600 units and the acreage of retail that they've asked for. We've got 3 proposals on the table, and are we ready to vote?
I can't see.
We'll put them back up so people can see. So actually I guess we have 4 proposals on the table. Bruce, you're still looking at Alternative 1 also, right?
I just said we ought to put it out there. I didn't say I was going to support it.
Okay.
Pia has something to say.
Yes, Pia.
I'm on the stakeholder committee for the HCP, NCCP, and this area, the lower portion of this study area is within the HCP, and I just want for everyone to take note of the species that are listed in the book on page 169, and so that listing will have effects when the HCP catches up with the general plan process. Right. And so how that will affect will be incorporated into the final general plan process.
Okay, yes, and it absolutely will be. All right, are we ready to vote? No? Richard?
I'd like to take Alternative 2 as I propose it off
the table.
Because
okay. Does anybody want to vote for Alternative 2?
Put it back.
A few people are going to. Okay, we're going to keep it on the table. Okay, so there's 4 proposals on the table. Is at least one person going to vote for Alternative 1? No, then we're taking it off the table. So it's not on the table. So on the table we have Alternative 2, which is just keep it resource management. That's what it is. Alternative 3, which is on the next piece of paper, is keeping it resource management today, but allowing under a specific plan the components that are shown under our Alternative 3 in your booklet, which include up to 600 homes, although I believe we've adjusted it downward in retail to match the developer's or applicant's proposal of approximately 3 acres of retail. Or no. Alternative 3 includes all the retail that was shown in Alternative 3.
No, I thought you said Alternative 3 was taking this plan of theirs and putting it over a resource conservation designation. I thought we were encouraging, like Mike said,
them to do...
That's fine. That's essentially the same thing I'm trying to say. We can state it in that way. Alternative 3 is resource management conservation with an overlay allowing a specific plan that would essentially amount to the thing that's described.
Right.
Oh, no, yes, okay, that's what that is. That's right. And then alternative 4 is the same thing except that it would include half as many units, 300 units instead of 600. Okay, so those are the 3 options. Are people ready to vote? Sure. Okay, how many in favor of alternative 2, resource conservation? 1, 2, 3. How many in favor of alternative 3, which is the resource conservation with the specific plan overlay or allowing the Hall-Eisen proposal? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 9. And how many in favor of alternative 4, which is resource management with the specific plan overlay allowing the Hall-Eisen proposal, but with only half as many units?
No, I'm sorry. I needed to be voted on that.
I meant to be. Wasn't counted on 3.
I think you went up. I was waiting for 4 and.
Yeah, let's count 3 again because you didn't count me.
Okay, we're counting 3.
Past my bedtime.
Which is, do I need to say again what it is?
No, just
count
it again.
Raise your hand if you're in favor of 3. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14. And how many are in favor of alternative 4, which is the same resource conservation with the specific plan overlay, allowing the Hall-Eisen proposal, but with half as many units? 1, 2, 3, 4. Okay. Break time, right?
Yes.
We'll reconvene at 9:10 on that clock.